Elfriede Blauensteiner. She placed Lonely Hearts advertisements, met elderly people in need of company, and presented herself as their devoted caregiver. Behind that kindness was a woman funding a gambling habit with other people's lives. Elfriede Blauensteiner was born in 1931 in Vienna, one of 6 children raised in poverty during the Great Depression. As an adult, she became a compulsive roulette gambler, visiting a casino near Vienna hundreds of times in a single year and losing an enormous sum at the tables. She had no formal nursing training, but she presented herself as a caregiver to elderly companions she met through newspaper personal advertisements. So how does a self-described caregiver come to be known across Austria as the Black Widow of Vienna? The first hint came from within her own marriage. Her second husband, Rudolf Blauensteiner, died in 1992 after a 10-day coma, and she later admitted she had experimented on him with a blood sugar-lowering drug. It was a confession that would later read as a rehearsal for what followed. In December 1992, an elderly neighbor named Franziska Köberl died, and she had handed Blauensteiner a savings book containing 2 million Austrian shillings, secured with a password that translated to the word heaven. In 1994, Blauensteiner married a retiree named Friedrich Döcker, transferred his house into her own name, and he died the following year. Each death left her with an estate worth a substantial sum. Each estate fed the same habit at the roulette wheel. Was anyone watching closely enough to notice the pattern forming? Her method was quiet and difficult to detect, involving a blood sugar-lowering medication mixed with an antidepressant, slipped into milk or food, which produced a fatal drop in blood sugar. In some cases, the effect was worsened by opening windows in winter and applying cold compresses to lower the victim's body temperature. Her motive was straightforward. She inherited estates through forged or coerced wills, and the money went straight to the casino. The case that finally exposed her began with an elderly man named Alois Pichler. Pichler was a widower she met in October 1995 through a personal advertisement, and he died at his home a month later. His adopted nephew grew suspicious about the death and about missing savings books, and reported it. An autopsy revealed fatal levels of the same 2 drugs. That single autopsy unraveled everything. Police connected the Pichler case to the earlier death of his neighbor Franziska Köberl, and Blauensteiner was arrested in January 1996. She confessed to 5 separate killings, then partially took the confession back. How many had there truly been? Austrian police came to believe she may have been responsible for as many as 10 deaths, though only 3 were ever formally proven. In March 1997, Blauensteiner was convicted of the murder of Alois Pichler and sentenced to life imprisonment, the maximum penalty available under Austrian law. Her lawyer, Harold Schmidt, was sentenced to 7 years as an accomplice and for forging Pichler's will. The caregiver and her own lawyer had been in it together. The courts were not finished with her. In April 2001, after the bodies of Köberl and Döcker were exhumed and tested, she was convicted of 2 further murders. No additional sentence was imposed, because Austrian law does not allow a punishment beyond the maximum she had already received. And the second trial went ahead largely for the record. Even behind bars, she remained a strange public figure. She maintained her innocence and wrote pieces for an Austrian magazine, claiming she had only ever meant to help her partners. A film loosely based on her story was made, and she complained publicly about how she was portrayed, reportedly saying she deserved a glamorous star to play her. She was even said to have attracted a small group of admirers during her imprisonment. It was a remarkable display of vanity from a woman convicted of poisoning the very people who had trusted her with their care. Elfriede Blauensteiner, died of a brain tumor in a Vienna hospital in November 2003, having served less than 7 years of her life sentence at a women's prison in Lower Austria. She was cremated in Vienna. A Lonely Hearts advertisement, a glass of milk, and a roulette table that quietly swallowed the inheritance of everyone who ever answered her call. The next case moves from inheritance and personal advertisements to a hospital ward, and to a caregiver whose presence at every emergency was the very thing that exposed her. Beverly Allett. She was a newly qualified nurse on an understaffed children's ward, hired on a short temporary contract. Within 2 months, that ward had become the scene of a series of unexplained emergencies. Beverly Allett was born in 1968 near Grantham, in Lincolnshire, England, one of 4 children. She left school at 16 and took a nursing course at a local college, where she repeatedly failed exams. She also had a documented history of self-harm and of fabricated illnesses, with frequent hospital visits. In February 1991, she was hired on a temporary 6-month contract by the chronically understaffed children's ward at Grantham and Kesteven Hospital as an enrolled level nurse. So how did a struggling trainee with that history end up alone with the most vulnerable patients in the building? Over a period of just 59 days, between February and April 1991, a series of young patients on that ward suffered sudden and unexplained medical crises. In total, 13 children were harmed during that stretch, and 4 of them died. To the staff at first, it looked like a run of terrible misfortune, the kind of grim coincidence that can strike any hospital. But how many emergencies does it take before misfortune begins to look like something far darker? The crises were caused by deliberate interference with the children's care, including the use of insulin and other substances. Allett's motive was never definitively established, but it was considered consistent with Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a condition in which a person induces a crisis in another, so that they themselves can be seen as the rescuer who steps in to help. She was not saving these children. She was, investigators ultimately concluded, the reason they had been placed in danger at all. It was a chilling inversion of everything a hospital ward is meant to be. The turning point came with the final death on the ward. After that death, 2 doctors raised the alarm with the authorities, and attention turned to blood samples that had been retained from earlier patients. What those samples showed was impossible to ignore. Tests at a specialist laboratory in Cardiff revealed insulin readings that pointed clearly to a deliberate external dose rather than any natural illness. A finding confirmed in a patient who had survived, as well as in one who had not. Then came the detail that named her. Duty rosters showed that Allett was the one nurse present at every single incident on the ward. One nurse, every emergency, across 59 days. The odds of coincidence had simply run out. She was suspended and then arrested in November 1991. Allett's trial took place at Nottingham Crown Court, and she pleaded not guilty to every charge against her. In May 1993, after a lengthy trial, she was convicted of 4 murders, 3 attempted murders, and 6 counts of grievous bodily harm with intent. The judge imposed 13 concurrent life sentences and described her as a serious danger who was unlikely ever to be considered safe enough for release. What happened to her after the verdict set her case apart? 1 week into her prison sentence, she was diagnosed with a personality disorder and transferred to Rampton Secure Hospital, a high-security psychiatric facility, where she has remained ever since. In 2007, a judge fixed the minimum term she must serve at 30 years. Has she ever come close to release? That 30-year minimum expired in November 2021, making her formally eligible to apply for parole. In October 2023, she appeared before a mental health tribunal seeking a transfer to a mainstream prison, a step needed before any parole consideration. That request was denied, and she remains at Rampton Secure Hospital. The case left a mark far beyond one hospital. An official inquiry into the failings, known as the Clothier Inquiry, led to nationwide reforms of how the health service screened people before hiring them into healthcare roles. Some experts have since publicly disputed her psychiatric diagnosis, arguing she belongs in a prison rather than a hospital. Years later, her case became part of the nurse training curriculum at the university where Lucy Letby qualified. A connection examined during the Thirlwall inquiry in 2024. A short temporary contract, a stretch of just 59 days, and a duty roster that pointed at one name. The next case is a very different kind of killer. Not a quiet figure in a care setting, but a woman who turned a few short weeks into a spree across the English countryside. Joanna Dennehy. She came from a stable, comfortable home in an English commuter town. Years later, she would tell police she wanted to kill enough people to be remembered alongside the figures of a famous crime story. Joanna Dennehy was born in 1982 in St. Albans, in Hertfordshire, and was raised in a stable middle-class home in the commuter town of Harpenden. She ran away from home as a teenager, and over the following years, her life moved into substance misuse and low-level crime, including convictions for assault. And she was on probation at the time of the killings. In 2012, she was assessed in prison and diagnosed with several serious personality disorders. So how did a young woman from a settled, comfortable background become one of the most dangerous offenders in modern Britain? By early 2013, Dennehy was living in rented accommodation in Peterborough, owned by a landlord named Kevin Lee, with whom she was also having an affair, and she acted as his paid enforcer, pressuring tenants over unpaid rent. It was in that role, and over a span of only 10 days, that the case turned from intimidation to murder. Her first victim was Łukasz Slaboszewski, a Polish delivery worker, who was lured to a property through flirtatious messages and killed in March 2013. Her second was John Chapman, a Falklands War veteran and Dennehy's own housemate, killed at the end of March. Her third, killed the same day as Chapman, was the landlord Kevin Lee, whose body was dumped in a ditch in the countryside. 3 lives in barely a week. What could possibly drive a pace like that? For Dennehy, the answer was not money, and it was not revenge or any personal grievance. She told police her motive was thrill, and that she wanted to murder a far larger number of men. It was killing purely for its own sake, and as it turned out, she was not alone. She had help from several accomplices, including a man known as Gary Richards, who drove her and helped dispose of the bodies, and who was later convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. 2 other men were also convicted of offenses connected to the case, including perverting the course of justice and assisting an offender. After the 3 killings in the Peterborough area, Dennehy fled to the city of Hereford. The spree was not over. In Hereford, in April 2013, she carried out 2 random street attacks on men who were complete strangers to her, a dog walker named Robin Bereza and a man named John Rogers. Both men were seriously hurt, but both survived their injuries. Dennehy was arrested that same day, and footage from the police station later showed her laughing and behaving casually during the booking process. The investigation moved quickly once she was in custody. Kevin Lee's family had reported him missing, and police identified Dennehy as a person of interest before the Hereford attacks took place. The bodies of her first 2 victims were found in a ditch near Peterborough days later. While she was held on remand, a diary was found containing a plan to escape from prison. which led to her being kept in solitary confinement for an extended period. In November 2013, Dennehy pleaded guilty at the Old Bailey to all 3 murders, both attempted murders and 3 counts of preventing lawful burial. In February 2014, the judge imposed life imprisonment with a whole life order, describing her as a cruel, calculating, selfish, and manipulative serial killer. At the time, she was only the 3rd woman in modern British history to receive such an order, alongside Myra Hindley and Rosemary West. That number rose to 4 when Lucy Letby received a whole life order in August 2023. So where is she now? Dennehy is held at a prison in County Durham and has no realistic prospect of parole. In 2016, she lost a high court claim arguing that her prolonged solitary confinement breached her human rights, with the judge ruling that the segregation had been necessary and proportionate. Her case has since been the subject of several television documentaries. A stable and comfortable childhood, a 10-day spree across the English countryside, and a stated wish to keep killing that the courts made absolutely certain she never could. The next case returns to a care setting and to a far quieter method. A nurse in Finland whose victims were the elderly and bedridden people placed in her trust. Aino Nykopkoski. She was a practical nurse trusted with the daily care of elderly, bedridden patients across the Helsinki area. Over a span of 5 years, the people in her charge began to die in numbers that no one could explain. Aino Nykopkoski was born in 1950 in Rantsila, in northern Finland. She worked as a practical nurse, an enrolled level care worker rather than a registered nurse, for various employers around Helsinki, including a private hospital, a care home run by a seniors foundation, and as a home care provider. Before the killings began, she already had previous criminal convictions for stealing drugs and property from patients in her care. So how did a care worker with that record stay in trusted positions beside the most fragile patients of all? Between 2004 and 2009, Nykopkoski moved through several care settings in the Helsinki area, and a pattern of deaths followed her from place to place. She was eventually convicted of 5 murders, along with 5 attempted murders and a series of other offenses, including aggravated assaults, thefts, and drug offenses. Her victims were all elderly and bedridden people in her care, and in line with strict Finnish privacy norms. Their names were never published. What they shared was vulnerability and a caregiver they had no reason to fear. Her method was deliberately hard to spot. She covertly gave non-prescribed sedatives, opiates, and other medications to her patients, often mixed into their food or yogurt. She also once spiked a colleague's coffee, an act treated as an aggravated assault. In a setting where elderly patients were already frail, who would think to question a quiet death? At one care home, investigators later noted that more than 10 elderly residents had died during her short time working there, and most had already been cremated before any suspicion arose. So what finally broke the silence? It was a patient who survived. In March 2009, an elderly home care client, a retired language lecturer, was rushed to a Helsinki hospital after Nykopkoski herself called the emergency line. The patient told doctors that her yogurt had tasted strangely bitter, and she was saved with a drug that reverses the effect of sedatives. A substitute doctor who was treating her grew concerned about the case and notified the Helsinki police. That one bitter-tasting yogurt opened the entire case. Nykopkoski was arrested in March 2009, and police seized roughly 1,800 pills from her. Investigators exhumed several graves as part of the inquiry. And although the preliminary investigation linked her to dozens of suspicious deaths, only 5 murders carried enough forensic evidence to bring to trial. The true scale of the case may never be known, because so many of the possible victims had already been laid to rest. In May 2010, the Helsinki District Court found her guilty, and in December 2010, she was sentenced to life imprisonment, which in Finland carries a minimum term of 12 years before any release can be considered. The Helsinki Court of Appeal upheld the verdict in 2012, and the Supreme Court of Finland later declined to hear a further appeal. Throughout the proceedings, she denied every one of the charges, insisting the deaths had been natural or accidental overdoses. A psychiatric assessment classified her as having an antisocial personality disorder, but she was found fully responsible for her actions. Her case is described as the largest serial murder case in modern Finnish history by victim count. But the story did not end with the verdict. Nikop Koski has since changed her surname more than once, including after marrying a fellow prisoner, and is now serving her sentence in an open prison. She has been allowed out on unescorted home leaves and has been studying at the Open University in Helsinki. For a woman convicted of 5 murders, it was a measure of freedom that her victims' families found difficult to accept. Will she ever be released? She has applied for parole 3 separate times, and each application has been rejected. Her third bid was heard in April 2025, and she took part in the hearing by video link while wearing a hood. In May 2025, the court rejected it, ruling that, given 5 murders and 5 attempted murders, she must serve clearly longer than the Finnish average before any release could be considered. The Finnish Criminal Sanctions Agency did not support her release. A bitter-tasting yogurt, 1,800 pills, and a nurse who, to this day, insists she did nothing wrong at all. The next case is a far darker kind of story. Not a lone killer, but a woman who became the trusted face that lured victims toward a man already known as a monster. Monique Olivier. She was the calm, ordinary-looking woman behind the wheel, sometimes with a young child in the back seat. That ordinariness was exactly what made her so dangerous, and it helped a serial killer hunt for years. Monique Olivier was born in 1948 in France. She worked at various points as a nurse and caregiver, including a documented post caring for a disabled person. And as an adult, she went through several difficult and physically harmful relationships before a hard divorce that left her raising 2 children largely alone. In 1984, while Michel Fourniret was in prison for offenses against young people, she answered his pen pal advertisement in a Catholic magazine. The two corresponded for years, and she allegedly promised in writing to help him if he would in turn kill her former husband. So how did a long-distance correspondence become one of the most notorious criminal partnerships in French history? The pair married in 1989, and they had a son together. A son who would one day testify against his own mother in court. Together, Fourniret and Olivier became known across France and Belgium as the perpetrators of a long campaign of killings. Fourniret confessed to 12 murders, and prosecutors suggested the true number could be far higher. Olivier's specific role is what places her on this list. She lured young women and girls toward the couple's vehicle by appearing as a trustworthy, non-threatening female driver, someone a stranger would not fear, sometimes with her own young son visible in the back seat. It was a quiet, calculated kind of deception. Who would hesitate to approach a woman and a child? The victims attributed to the couple span more than 15 years and 2 countries. They included Isabelle Laville, taken in 1987 under the pretext of asking for directions, in what is regarded as the couple's first known killing. They included Joanna Parish, a young British woman from Gloucestershire who was studying at the University of Leeds and working as a language assistant in France when she was killed in 1990. They included Elisabeth Brichet, a young girl taken in Belgium in 1989, whose remains were later found at the couple's chateau. And they included Estelle Mouzin, a child who was abducted on her way home from school in 2003, and whose body has never been recovered despite repeated and intensive searches. So how was the partnership finally broken? Fourniret was arrested in Belgium in 2003 after a teenage girl managed to escape from his vehicle during a failed abduction, and Olivier was arrested alongside him. What happened next was crucial. In 2004, Olivier began to confess, apparently believing that police already knew more than they did. Her confessions allowed investigators to recover the remains of several victims from the grounds of the couple's chateau and to identify the dead. Without her words, some of those families might never have learned what had happened. Olivier was extradited from Belgium to France, and at a first trial in 2008, she was convicted of complicity in 5 murders and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 28 years. Fourniret received life without parole. At a second trial in 2018, she received an additional 20 years for complicity in another murder. But the most recent chapter is the one that gave several grieving families their long-awaited day in court. Fourniret died in prison in 2021, which meant that a third trial, held at Nanterre between November and December 2023, saw Olivier tried alone. She faced charges of complicity in the murders of Marie-Angèle Domès, Joanna Parrish, and Estelle Mouzin. On the 19th of December 2023, after about 10 hours of jury deliberation, Olivier was sentenced to life imprisonment with a 20-year minimum term. She told the families of the victims that she asked for their forgiveness. The verdict became final when neither side appealed. Today, Monique Olivier is held at a women's detention center in Rennes, in Brittany, kept in strict isolation because of threats from other inmates. The father of Estelle Mouzin has continued to pursue legal action over how the original disappearance was handled by the authorities. Whether Olivier was an active partner or controlled accomplice remains the central debate of her case, explored in documentaries and books alike. What is not debated is the role she played at the roadside, the friendly, unthreatening face that made the trap work. The next case trades a quiet country road for the polished world of high fashion, and a killing carried out not by the woman herself, but on her orders. Patrizia Reggiani. She had married into one of the most famous fashion families in the world. When the marriage ended and the money slipped away, she arranged to have her former husband killed on a Milan staircase. Patrizia Reggiani was born Patrizia Martinelli in 1948 in the province of Modena, in Italy. As a child, her social standing changed dramatically when her mother married a wealthy entrepreneur who legally adopted her and gave her his surname, instantly elevating her status. She met Maurizio Gucci, heir to the Gucci fashion empire, at a party in 1970, and the two married in Milan in 1972, against the wishes of Maurizio's father, who considered her a social climber. For a time, they lived a glamorous life, splitting their world between Italy and a penthouse in New York. So what turned that gilded life into a murder plot? The marriage came apart in the 1980s. Maurizio left Reggiani in 1985 for another woman, and the couple divorced in 1994. For Reggiani, the loss was not only personal, but financial and social. She was bitter about the alimony settlement, and she was enraged by Maurizio's decision to sell off his Gucci shares to an investment group, a move she regarded as foolish. The wealth, the name, the empire she had married into, all of it was slipping out of her grasp at once. How far would that resentment carry her? On the morning of the 27th of March, 1995, Maurizio Gucci was shot and killed by a hired gunman on the steps of his office building in the center of Milan. a doorman who was also shot at during the attack, survived. In her own diary that same day, Reggiani wrote a single word, the Greek term for paradise. It was not a crime she carried out with her own hands. The killing was arranged through a circle of co-conspirators, including a close friend of Reggiani's, described as a psychic, who brokered the contract, along with an intermediary, a getaway driver, and the gunman himself. For nearly 2 years, the case went unsolved, and Reggiani lived freely in Milan. Who would think to connect a fashion world widow to a contract killing? The breakthrough came when an informant tipped off Milan police. Wiretaps on the conspirators and financial records showing the payments tied the plot together, and Reggiani was arrested in January 1997. In 1998, Reggiani was convicted of being the mastermind behind the murder and sentenced to 29 years in prison. Her defense had argued that a brain tumor operation years earlier had affected her judgment and reduced her responsibility. On appeal in 2000, the conviction was upheld, though the sentence was reduced to 26 years. That same year, she reportedly attempted to take her own life in her cell. Her behavior in custody only deepened her notoriety. She was offered the chance of work release in 2011 but reportedly refused it, saying that she had never worked in her life and was not about to start. She was finally released in October 2016 after serving 18 years with credit for good behavior. So what became of her after release? Reggiani is free, living in a townhouse in Milan, and for a time she worked as a design consultant at a costume jewelry house, often seen out walking with a pet parrot perched on her shoulder. In 2017, a Milan appeals court ruled that, despite her conviction, she remained entitled to a substantial annuity from Maurizio Gucci's estate, plus several years of back pay, a decision her daughters had unsuccessfully contested. The case is not entirely closed, even now. In recent years, her 2 daughters and a court-appointed legal guardian have been involved in a continuing dispute over the management of her financial affairs. In October 2025, her daughters petitioned a Milan court to be appointed her guardians themselves, a request the court rejected. Reggiani has long maintained that she was wrongfully convicted, although in one interview she made a notorious remark about her poor eyesight being the reason she did not shoot Maurizio herself. A fashion empire, a Milan staircase, and a single word for paradise written in a diary on the day of the murder. The next case is one of the most disturbing on this list. A woman who ran a small business that customers walked into every day, unaware of what lay beneath their feet. Estibelis Carranza. She ran a cheerful little ice cream parlor in Vienna, a bright shopfront where families stopped on warm afternoons. Beneath its floor, sealed away in concrete, lay a secret that would not be discovered until a renovation crew began to dig. Estibelis Carranza was born in 1978 in Mexico City to Spanish-Mexican parents, and the family moved to Barcelona when she was a young child. She studied finance at university in Spain, then moved to Germany in 2002, where she met and married a man named Holger Holtz. The couple later relocated to Vienna in 2005 and opened an ice cream parlor in one of the city's districts. On the surface, she was simply a small business owner, serving customers in a quiet corner of the Austrian capital. So what was she hiding beneath that ordinary life? Carranza was reportedly fixated on having a child of her own, and that fixation would sit at the dark center of her crimes. She divorced Holtz, though he continued to live in their shared apartment. And she began a new relationship with a man named Manfred Hinterberger, who sold ice cream machines for a living. In 2008, Carranza shot and killed her former husband, Holger Holtz, in the apartment they had once shared together. 2 years later, in 2010, She shot and killed her former boyfriend, Manfred Hinterberger, after accusing him of being unfaithful to her. In both cases, she concealed the remains in concrete in the cellar beneath the ice cream parlor, and she used air fresheners to mask the smell of decay. For years afterward, customers came and went above a hidden crime scene, ordering ice cream just a few steps from a terrible truth. How long can a secret as heavy as that one stay buried? Carranza later wrote that she had killed each of the two men for failing to give her a child. It was a motive as chilling as it was strange. Two lives ended over a longing that she chose to blame them, fatally, for never satisfying. The discovery, when it finally came almost by chance. In June 2011, workers carrying out renovations in the cellar of the parlor found the concreted remains hidden below. By that point, Carranza had already withdrawn cash and fled the country, heading first toward Paris, then diverting to Italy out of fear that she would be arrested at the airport. She was arrested in the northern Italian city of Udine and was then extradited back to Austria to face trial for the two killings. Her trial began in Vienna in November 2012, and Carranza confessed to both killings before the court. That same month, a Vienna jury unanimously found her guilty, and the judge sentenced her to life imprisonment. Combined with an indefinite commitment to a secure psychiatric institution under Austrian law for offenders considered mentally abnormal. A court psychologist assessed her as fully responsible for her actions, but considered her to carry a high risk of reoffending, and likened her to a person who simply wanted to be rescued by someone else. What has happened to her since the verdict? Carranza was initially held at a women's prison in Lower Austria. In 2017, she was transferred to a forensic psychiatric facility, becoming the very first woman admitted to what had previously been an all-male institution, after a dedicated women's ward was opened there. That placement drew domestic criticism, given that her established pattern had been to lure and harm the men in her life. A son was born to her in early 2013 while she was in custody, and the child is being raised by relatives in Barcelona. In 2014, she published a memoir about what she called her two lives and her case, with proceeds reportedly going toward her son. Her lawyers have at various times sought her transfer to a prison in Spain, a move that would depend on her being declared no longer a danger. And as of a late 2025 documentary, she remained in Austrian custody, an ordinary ice cream parlor, a sealed cellar, and a renovation crew that uncovered what 2 years of poured concrete had hidden from view. The final case is unlike every other on this list. It is the story of a nurse who was convicted, imprisoned, and then, after years of appeals, definitively cleared, raising hard questions about how such cases are built. Daniela Poggiali. She spent years labeled a killer nurse, convicted and imprisoned more than once. Her face splashed across newspapers. And then, after a remarkable and exhausting legal saga, Italy's highest court cleared her name for good. Daniela Poggiali was born in 1972 in the Ravenna area of Italy, in the Emilia-Romagna region. She worked as a registered nurse in the care department of a hospital in the town of Lugo, where she had been employed from 2012. Colleagues later described her as cold and unpleasant toward fellow staff, but warm and engaging with patients' families. When suspicion fell on her, that description would harden in the public eye into something far more sinister. But was the suspicion ever sound? In early 2014, prosecutors noted that a striking number of patients in her department had died over a 3-month period, a statistical cluster that appeared to fall on her shifts. They alleged that she had given lethal doses to elderly patients she found difficult, and she was eventually charged in connection with 2 separate deaths. There was also a widely circulated photograph she had taken next to the body of a deceased patient, which leaked to the media and became central to the public narrative around her. She later said the photograph captured nothing more than a foolish moment of relief after a grueling shift. Poggiali was arrested in October 2014 after a routine post-mortem examination on one patient revealed an abnormal result. What followed was one of the most drawn-out and procedurally extreme legal sagas in modern Italian criminal history. A sequence of trials, acquittals, reversals, and retrials stretching across years. Could the case against her actually hold up under proper scrutiny? In 2016, a court of assize in Ravenna found her guilty of one murder and sentenced her to life imprisonment. But in 2017, an appeal court in Bologna acquitted her, and she was released after more than 1,000 days spent in custody. In 2018, Italy's Court of Cassation overturned that acquittal and ordered a fresh retrial. In 2019, at that retrial, she was acquitted again, with her supposed victim's death attributed to natural causes after prosecutors failed to prove murder beyond reasonable doubt. The case still was not over. Not by a long way. In 2020, she was rearrested while caring for her terminally ill mother and was charged in connection with a second death, then convicted in a separate proceeding and sentenced to 30 years. Then, in 2021, an appeal court acquitted her once more on both of the charges she had ever faced, ruling plainly that the alleged crime had not taken place, and ordered her immediate release from custody. What finally settled it was a closer look at the evidence itself. The statistical evidence used against her was re-examined by independent experts, including the Leiden University statistician Richard Gill, who had previously helped clear a wrongly convicted Dutch nurse in a similar case. Gill and his colleague Giulia Mortera concluded that the original analysis had ignored key factors, such as the time when patients were admitted and the particular nature of a palliative care ward. Gill memorably dismissed the original methodology as deeply flawed and unreliable. The cluster of deaths on her shifts, the experts argued, simply did not prove what the prosecution had claimed it did. In January 2023, Italy's Court of Cassation declared the prosecution's final appeal inadmissible, confirming her acquittal definitively and for good. 9 years and several separate trials after the case first began, Daniela Poggiali was cleared once and for all. So where does that leave her? Daniela Poggiali is a free woman, definitively acquitted of any homicide whatsoever. She does, however, remain struck off the Italian nursing register, not over any killing, but over professional misconduct connected to the leaked photograph. She has said publicly that she would like to return one day to nursing. Her case is now cited internationally as a clear example of how statistical patterns alone, without firm forensic proof, can produce wrongful convictions of healthcare workers. And it is grouped with several comparable cases in other countries. It is the rare entry on this list that ends not with a verdict against a killer, but with a hard caution about how easily a serious case can be built on the wrong foundation and about how many years it can take to undo the damage once it is done. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.